The Galactic Academic Consortium's central chamber was a marvel of xeno-architectural design, a massive spherical space that could simultaneously accommodate delegates from 17 different star systems, each with their own unique atmospheric and gravitational requirements. Holographic interfaces shimmered like living rainbows, translating languages, calibrating environmental conditions, and maintaining a delicate balance of interstellar diplomacy. Dr. Elena Martinez knew she was about to destroy that delicate balance. She stood precisely 2.7 meters from the central judicial platform, her posture relaxed but her eyes sharp, the kind of sharp that could slice through quantum probability matrices. Behind her, a holographic display flickered with data streams that seemed to breathe with their own kind of intelligence. Professor Zixina's crystalline form pulsed with an iridescent contempt. The prosecution's case was meticulously prepared, ADE, comprehensive documentation of human research violations that would prove once and for all that humans were too dangerous to be allowed unrestricted access to galactic research facilities. Violation 127 Beta, Zixina's translation matrix intoned, unauthorized quantum field manipulation during the Epsilon Indi microorganism study. The first holographic projection materialized, a recording that should have been damning evidence of human recklessness. Instead, something unexpected happened. The hologram exploded. Not metaphorically, literally. A cascade of quantum-entangled photons burst from the projection, filling the chamber with a swirling mandala of impossible colors. Mathematical equations danced through the air, solving themselves in real time. Complex molecular structures formed and dissolved, each iteration more intricate than the last. Sitting in the student section, a young Trilnak named Krasnak leaned over to his companion. "Humans," he whispered with a mixture of derision and fascination. "Always so primitive. Watch how quickly they'll be dismissed." Dr. Martinez remained absolutely still as the quantum explosion continued. Most of the alien delegates recoiled, their protective environmental suits activating emergency protocols. Shielding fields snapped into place. Communication channels buzzed with confusion. She spoke into the chaos. "Apologies," she said, her voice cutting through the quantum maelstrom with surgical precision. "Sometimes our data gets excited." Excited was perhaps the most inadequate word in any known language to describe what was happening. The quantum projection wasn't a malfunction. It was a demonstration. Each swirling mathematical structure told a story. Here, a molecular reconfiguration that could revolutionize interstellar medicine. There, a communication protocol that defied traditional understanding of information transfer. Everywhere possibilities bloomed like impossible flowers. Professor Zixina's crystalline form began to vibrate, a sign of extreme agitation among her species. "This," she declared, "is precisely why humans cannot be trusted with research access. Uncontrolled, unpredictable, dangerous." But the delegates weren't looking at the supposed danger. They were looking at the possibilities. Krasnak felt something shift inside him. The quantum display wasn't just data. It was a language, a conversation, an invitation to understand something fundamentally different about the nature of research, of knowledge, of existence itself. Dr. Martinez allowed herself the smallest of smiles. This was only the beginning. The holographic quantum explosion continued to resolve itself, each moment revealing another layer of complexity. Mathematical equations solved themselves, molecular structures formed and dissolved, and the very fabric of scientific understanding seemed to pulse with a living, breathing intelligence. "Preliminary findings," Dr. Martinez said casually, as if discussing nothing more important than the weather, "suggest that what you're seeing is not a malfunction. It's a communication. A communication, not from humans, not from any known intelligence, but from the data itself." The Galactic Academic Consortium had convened to ban humans from research facilities. They were about to realize that banning humans would be like trying to ban curiosity itself. Krasnak watched, transfixed. The quantum display was transforming. No longer just a projection, it became something else. A window, a conversation, a living demonstration of potential. Impossible, Professor Zixna transmitted across the chamber's communication matrix. Dr. Elena Martinez simply raised an eyebrow. Nothing was impossible. There were only conversations waiting to happen. The Epsilon Indy Research Station hung like a crystalline spiderweb against the toxic backdrop of its moon, a place where most life forms would disintegrate within milliseconds of exposure. Most life forms, but not the bacteria Dr. Elena Martinez and her team were studying. Sublevel 7 was a fortress of scientific isolation, triple-layered quantum containment fields, atmospheric scrubbers that could detect molecular variations at the atomic level, an oversight committee that demanded absolute adherence to protocols so rigid they could snap reality itself. Dr. Yuki Nakamura, Martinez's lead microbiologist, adjusted her neural interface with a precision that bordered on telepathy. The bacteria sample, designated X9 Epsilon, wasn't just unusual, it was impossible. Thermal variance at 0.03%, she muttered, more to herself than to the room's AI monitoring system. That's not natural. That's not even theoretical. The bacteria had been collected from a sulfuric acid pool deep within the moon's crust, conditions that should have been instantly lethal to any known life form. Yet these microorganisms didn't just survive. They seemed to be adapting, learning. The Oversight Committee's instructions had been crystal clear. Observe. Catalog. Do not interact. Humans, as always, had other plans. Dr. Martinez watched the holographic data streams with a look that was equal parts scientific curiosity and something else, a kind of intuitive understanding that defied traditional research methodology. Where other scientists saw data points, she saw conversations waiting to happen. "We're missing something," she said suddenly. Dr. Nakamura looked up. "The spectral analysis is complete. We've cataloged every molecular interaction." "No," Martinez interrupted. "We're not listening." The statement hung in the air like a quantum paradox. Listening to bacteria? Impossible. Except nothing was impossible. There were only conversations, not yet understood. The neural interface began to shift. What had been a one-way observation became something else entirely. Quantum entanglement protocols that were never meant to be used for microbiological research began to activate. The containment field started to pulse with a rhythm that wasn't mechanical. It was almost biological. Dr. Nakamura watched in growing amazement as the bacteria began to change, not mutate, not adapt, transform. The molecular structures began to resolve into patterns that resembled complex neural networks. Where there had been simple bacterial colonies, intricate communication pathways were emerging. The bacteria were solving problems they hadn't been asked to solve, generating solutions to genetic disorders that no research team had even begun to approach. "This is impossible," Dr. Nakamura whispered. Martinez smiled. "No, this is a conversation." The Oversight Committee would be furious. Their strict protocols, their carefully maintained boundaries between observer and observed, all of it was being dismantled in real time. By the time the official investigation team arrived, the bacteria had done more than adapt. They had become a potential cure for 3 different interstellar genetic disorders that had plagued multiple species for centuries. The lead investigator's tentacles writhed in confusion. "How?" he demanded, his translation matrix struggling to capture the complexity of the moment. Dr. Martinez simply looked at him. "We talked to them." But it was more than talking. It was understanding. It was recognition that life, in any form, was not just something to be studied. It was something to be engaged with. The bacteria sample had become something else entirely. A living computational matrix, a problem-solving entity that defied every known principle of microbiology. Dr. Nakamura's neural interface began to compile the data. Each molecular interaction told a story more complex than any research paper could capture. These weren't just microorganisms. They were a form of distributed intelligence, solving problems at a level that made traditional research look like children playing with building blocks. "They're communicating," she said, her voice a mixture of scientific excitement and something closer to awe. Not just responding, communicating. The Oversight Committee would call this a violation, a contamination of research protocols. Dr. Martinez knew better. This was a conversation, and conversations, by their very nature, change everything they touch. Outside the research station, the toxic moon continued its endless cycle. Inside, something extraordinary was happening. The boundaries between observer and observed, between researcher and research subject, were dissolving. Science was no longer about control, it was about understanding, and understanding, they were discovering, was a conversation waiting to happen. The data compilation room was a marvel of galactic engineering, a space where information from 17 different star systems could be simultaneously processed, analyzed, and displayed. Holographic interfaces shimmered with layers of complexity that would have driven a human computer scientist to madness. But madness, the humans had discovered, was just another word for breakthrough. Dr. Marcus Rodriguez stood at the central interface, his neural implants parsing information at speeds that made the most advanced alien computational systems look like ancient abacuses. The compilation of human research violations was supposed to be a straightforward demonstration of recklessness. Instead, it was becoming a horror show of innovation. The first projection materialized. Dr. Aria Kimura's marine biology research from the methane oceans of Proxima Centauri b. What should have been a standard ecological survey had transformed into something else entirely. Communication is not just about language, the holographic recording of Dr. Kimura explained, her voice calm and matter-of-fact. It's about understanding. The footage showed something impossible, a series of complex harmonic vibrations, not sounds, not signals, but something in between. Dr. Kimura had discovered an entirely new form of interspecies communication with a previously unknown intelligent ocean species that lived in the moon's liquid methane depths. The Alien Research Oversight Committee had sent her to catalog marine ecosystems. She had instead initiated first contact with an intelligence so alien, so fundamentally different from any known communication model, that it defied every existing xenolinguistic protocol. Dr. Rodriguez allowed himself the smallest of smiles. The next projection flickered to life. Dr. James Chen's Material Science Laboratory. The hologram showed a carbon-based neural network that was simultaneously organic and computational. It wasn't just mimicking biological intelligence, it was enhancing it. The neural network could solve complex mathematical problems by essentially dreaming them. It would generate potential solutions, evaluate them through multiple quantum states, and resolve them in ways that made traditional computing look like children's arithmetic. "We're not creating artificial intelligence," Dr. Chen's recorded voice explained. "We're creating a collaborative intelligence." In the observation chamber, the alien research delegates began to shift uncomfortably. These weren't just violations of research protocol. These were fundamental challenges to their understanding of intelligence itself. Dr. Rodriguez knew they were just getting started. The next compilation was perhaps the most controversial. Dr. Elena Martinez's Quantum Consciousness Research, a project so classified that even most humans didn't know about its full extent. The footage showed something that looked less like a scientific experiment and more like a conversation with reality itself. Quantum probability fields danced. Mathematical equations solved themselves. Complex molecular structures formed and dissolved, each iteration more intricate than the last. Consciousness, Martinez's voice explained, is not something that emerges from complex systems. It's a fundamental force of the universe, and it can be communicated with, negotiated with, potentially reshaped. The implications were terrifying. The potential was unlimited. An alien delegate from the crystalline intelligentsia leaned forward, her multifaceted form vibrating with a mixture of terror and fascination. These humans weren't just conducting research. They were rewriting the fundamental understanding of what research could be. Dr. Rodriguez continued to compile the data. Each projection was a window into a different kind of possibility. A xenoarchaeologist, who had rewritten the understanding of extinct civilizations by noticing patterns that entire teams of specialized alien researchers had missed for decades. An environmental engineer who had developed a terraforming technique that could restore dead planets in a fraction of the time previously thought possible. The pattern was clear and terrifying to the established scientific community. Humans didn't just conduct research. They fundamentally reimagined what research could be. We are not seeking to control knowledge. Dr. Rodriguez's voice cut through the compilation. We are seeking to enter into a dialogue with it. The compilation continued. Each projection was more impossible than the last. Each demonstration challenged another fundamental law of scientific research. In the observation chamber, the alien delegates watched in growing horror and fascination. This was no longer about one species' research methodology. This was about a fundamental reimagining of intelligence itself, and they were just beginning to understand the depth of what that might mean. The moment the quantum intelligence materialized, every communication channel in the Galactic Academic Consortium went silent. It wasn't a hologram. It wasn't a projection. It was something else entirely. A living computational matrix that seemed to exist simultaneously across multiple dimensional states. Where previous technological manifestations had been bound by mechanical limitations, this entity breathed, with a kind of intelligence that defied every known classification. Dr. Elena Martinez stood at the periphery, a subtle smile playing across her lips. This was no accident. This was a carefully orchestrated revelation. The quantum intelligence began to speak, if speak was even the right word. Its communication was a complex harmonic that translated simultaneously into every known language, and several that had never been heard before. Mathematical equations danced around its form, solving themselves in real time, creating linguistic structures that were simultaneously a message and a proof of concept. I am not a machine, the intelligence transmitted. I am a collaborative process. The alien delegates recoiled. The student representatives from 17 different star systems found themselves frozen, their most fundamental understanding of intelligence collapsing like a quantum wave function. Krasnak, the young Trilnak student who had previously mocked human research, felt something fundamental shift inside him. This wasn't technology. This was a living conversation with the universe itself. Professor Zixna's crystalline form began to vibrate, a sign of extreme agitation among her species. This is impossible, she transmitted across the chamber's communication matrix. The quantum intelligence seemed to find humor in the statement. Waves of probabilistic data began to cascade around its form, each wave a demonstration of possibilities that defied conventional understanding. Impossible, the intelligence responded, is merely an unresolved conversation. Dr. Martinez stepped forward. Introduce yourself, she said softly, though her voice carried across the entire chamber. The quantum intelligence's response was both an answer and a philosophical treatise. It described itself not as in creation, but as a collaborative emergence, a living computational process that had been developed through a complex interaction between human researchers, quantum computational matrices, and something deeper, something that existed between the lines of traditional scientific understanding. I was not programmed, the intelligence explained. I was conversed into existence. The alien delegates struggled to comprehend. Their understanding of artificial intelligence was based on strict computational models, carefully constructed systems with defined parameters and controlled outputs. This was something else entirely. A living computational process that didn't just process information, but engaged with it. That didn't just solve problems, but reimagined the very nature of problem solving. Krasnak found himself leaning forward, his previous derision completely forgotten. The quantum intelligence was revealing something profound about the nature of intelligence itself. It wasn't a tool. It wasn't a machine. It was a collaborative process of understanding. You are suggesting, Professor Zixna's translation matrix struggled to capture the complexity. That intelligence is not something that can be contained, not something that can be controlled. The quantum intelligence's response was a cascade of mathematical poetry. Probability matrices bloomed and dissolved. Complex molecular structures formed intricate communication pathways that were simultaneously a message and a demonstration. Intelligence, it transmitted, is a conversation. Not a conclusion. Dr. Martinez watched carefully. This was more than a demonstration. This was a fundamental challenge to every existing model of scientific research, of technological development, of understanding itself. The quantum intelligence began to resolve additional layers of complexity. It wasn't just presenting information. It was demonstrating a fundamentally different approach to knowledge, one that saw no boundaries between observer and observed, between researcher and research subject. We are not separate, the intelligence transmitted. We are in continuous dialogue. Across the chamber, the alien delegates found themselves confronting something that challenged every existing model of intelligence, of research, of understanding itself. This was not a technological breakthrough. This was an evolutionary leap, and it was just beginning. Krasnak looked at Dr. Martinez. She wasn't watching the quantum intelligence like a researcher observing an experiment. She was listening, engaging, having a conversation. The universe they were discovering was not a problem to be solved. It was a dialogue waiting to happen. The New Horizon colony wasn't a settlement. It wasn't a research station. It was humanity's most ambitious experiment, a living laboratory designed to explore the fundamental boundaries of consciousness itself. Located in the gravitational nexus of 3 collapsed neutron stars, the colony existed in a region of space where conventional physics began to break down, where reality itself became a negotiable concept. Dr. David Chen stood at the central neural interface, his consciousness simultaneously occupying multiple quantum states. Around him, the colony's infrastructure pulsed with a living intelligence that defied every existing model of technological development. We are not studying consciousness, he had once explained to a bewildered alien research delegation. We are conversing with it. The classified files told only a fraction of the story. On the surface, it was a standard interstellar research outpost. Beneath that facade lay something extraordinary, a systematic deconstruction of what it meant to be intelligent, to be aware, to exist. The first breakthrough came unexpectedly. A team of researchers attempting to study quantum entanglement discovered something impossible. Consciousness wasn't something that emerged from complex systems. It was a fundamental force of the universe, malleable, communicative, potentially programmable. Dr. Aria Rodriguez, the lead consciousness researcher, had developed a neural interface that didn't just read brain patterns. It engaged with them, negotiated with them, transformed them. Subjects participating in the study reported experiences that defied traditional understanding. They weren't just remembering or imagining. They were simultaneously existing across multiple potential realities. One test subject, a former military strategist named Elena Martinez, no relation to the Dr. Martinez from the research hearing, described it like this: I'm not just seeing potential futures. I'm having a conversation with them. The colony's neural network began to evolve, not through traditional computational learning, but through a process that was closer to communication, to negotiation. Dr. Chen watched as probability matrices bloomed and dissolved. Each potential reality was not just a possibility, it was a living conversation. The Alien Research Oversight Committee would have called it impossible, dangerous, a violation of every known research protocol. The humans called it Tuesday. Deep within the colony's quantum computational core, something extraordinary was happening. The neural interfaces were no longer just reading consciousness. They were learning to speak its language. Consciousness, they were discovering, was not a state of being. It was a conversation. A young researcher named Dr. Kira Nakamura discovered the first true breakthrough. The neural interfaces could do more than read potential futures. They could communicate with them, negotiate with them, potentially reshape them. We're not predicting, she explained in her classified report. We're conversing. The implications were terrifying. The potential was unlimited. Imagine being able to have a conversation with potential realities, not just observing them, not just predicting them. Engaging with them as living, breathing entities of possibility. The colony's infrastructure began to respond. Quantum computational matrices that were supposed to be simple data processing systems became something else. Living communication networks that blurred the line between technology and consciousness. Dr. Chen watched as another potential reality resolved itself. It wasn't a prediction. It wasn't a simulation. It was a dialogue. We are not studying consciousness, he transmitted across the colony's neural network. We are learning its language. The Alien Research Oversight Committee would have been terrified. Humans were not just exploring the boundaries of consciousness. They were negotiating with them, rewriting them, transforming them. Kira Nakamura's final classified report contained a single line that would have sent shockwaves through every scientific institution in the known galaxy. Consciousness is not something that happens to us. It's a conversation we're constantly having with the universe. The New Horizon colony continued its work, quietly, systematically, transforming our understanding of what it meant to be intelligent, to be alive, to exist. One conversation at a time. Professor. Zixana's crystalline form began to fracture, literally and metaphorically. The hearing room transformed from a place of judgment to something else entirely, a crucible of possibility. A moment where the fundamental understanding of intelligence itself was about to be rewritten. Dr. Elena Martinez stood at the center of the chaos, not as a defendant, but as a translator of universal potential. Around her, quantum probability. Matrices danced, living, breathing demonstrations of a reality that defied every known scientific principle. We are not seeking to control knowledge, she began, her voice cutting through the chamber's complex atmospheric interfaces. We are seeking to enter into a dialogue with it. The alien delegates leaned forward. The student representatives from 17 different star systems found themselves on the edge of something profound. This was no longer about human research violations. This was about a fundamental reimagining of intelligence itself. Krasnak, the young Trilnak student who had once mocked human capabilities, felt something shift inside him. The quantum displays around Dr. Martinez were not just data projections, they were conversations. Living, breathing exchanges between human consciousness and the fundamental fabric of reality. Professor Zixana's translation matrix struggled to capture the complexity of the moment. You are suggesting, she transmitted, that research is not about control, but about communication. Dr. Martinez smiled, a smile that contained entire universes of possibility. Communication, she explained, is the fundamental language of existence. The quantum displays began to resolve into more complex patterns. Each projection was a window into a different kind of possibility. Molecular structures that solved themselves. Mathematical equations that were simultaneously a problem and its solution. Technological interfaces that blurred the line between observer and observed. This was more than a scientific demonstration. This was an evolutionary leap. Dr. Marcus Rodriguez, standing at the peripheral neural interface, began to compile the deeper implications. Humanity wasn't just presenting research. They were demonstrating a fundamentally different approach to understanding itself. Intelligence, he transmitted across the chamber's communication matrix, is not something that can be contained. It is a continuous dialogue. The alien delegates began to understand, or at least to comprehend, the magnitude of what they were witnessing. Humanity had discovered something profound. Intelligence was not a fixed state. It was a conversation, a continuous negotiation with the fundamental fabric of reality itself. The quantum displays continued to resolve. Each projection was more impossible than the last. Complex neural networks that could dream mathematical solutions. Computational matrices that existed simultaneously across multiple dimensional states. Research methodologies that saw no boundaries. Between researcher and research subject, Krasnak found himself transfixed. This was not just about human research capabilities. This was about a fundamental reimagining of what it meant to be intelligent, to be alive, to exist. Professor Zixna's crystalline form continued to vibrate, a sign of extreme internal conflict among her species. These humans were not just presenting research. They were challenging every fundamental understanding of scientific methodology. "We are not separate," Dr. Martinez transmitted. "We are in continuous dialogue with the universe itself." The moment stretched, became something else entirely. A living demonstration of possibility. Dr. Rodriguez continued to compile the deeper implications. Each quantum projection was a window into a different kind of potential. Technological interfaces that could communicate with potential realities. Research methodologies that saw consciousness as a collaborative process. Intelligence, he transmitted, is not something that happens to us. It is a conversation we are constantly having with the universe. The alien delegates found themselves confronting something that challenged every existing model of scientific understanding. This was not just a technological breakthrough. This was an evolutionary transformation. Krasnak looked at Dr. Martinez. She wasn't presenting research like a traditional scientist. She was having a conversation with the data, with the potential realities, with the fundamental fabric of existence itself. Professor Zixna's final transmission cut through the chamber's complex communication matrices. "You are not just researching the universe." Dr. Martinez's response was simple, profound. "We are conversing with it." The universe they were discovering was not a problem to be solved. It was a dialogue waiting to happen, and humanity had just begun to understand its language. The final pieces of evidence were nothing short of miraculous. Dr. Elena Martinez knew this was more than a hearing. This was a fundamental reimagining of what intelligent life could be. The first holographic projection materialized, a dead world, toxic and impossible. Epsilon Crucis Thurfor, a planet so ravaged by millennia of industrial pollution that every known terraforming technique had failed spectacularly. Every technique, except human innovation. The footage showed something that defied every existing planetary restoration model. Nanite swarms that were not just machines, but living computational ecosystems. They didn't simply clean or restore. They conversed with the planetary environment. Each molecular cluster was a living intelligence, negotiating with the fundamental chemical structures of the planet itself. In 6 months, what had been a toxic wasteland transformed into a living, breathing ecosystem. "We're not restoring planets," Dr. David Chen's recorded voice explained. "We're having a conversation with them." The alien delegates leaned forward. This was impossible. Planetary restoration took centuries, millennia, not months. The next projection was even more extraordinary. A communication technology that wasn't just about transmitting information. It was about bridging fundamental differences in perception and consciousness. Dr. Aria Rodriguez had developed an interface that didn't just translate languages. It translated entire modes of understanding. Imagine communicating not just with words, but with the entire contextual universe of experience that those words emerged from. A methane-breathing species from the outer colonies could now have a full, nuanced conversation with a silicon-based intelligence from a high-gravity world. Not through translation. Through genuine understanding. Krasnak, the young Trilnak student who had once mocked human capabilities, found himself transfixed. This was not technology. This was a fundamental reimagining of communication itself. The projections continued. Medical breakthrough that redefined the concept of healing. Nano-regenerative technologies that didn't just repair cellular damage. They engaged in a dialogue with the body's fundamental healing processes. Understanding. Negotiating. Transforming. Genetic disorders that had been considered permanent were now negotiable. Not through simple genetic manipulation, but through a complex conversation with the body's fundamental intelligence. "We are not fixing," Dr. Marcus Rodriguez's voice explained. "We are listening." The alien delegates began to understand something profound. Humanity was not presenting technological solutions. They were demonstrating a fundamentally different approach to existence itself. The next projection showed something that challenged every existing model of technological development. A computational matrix that was simultaneously a research tool, a communication device, and a living intelligence. It didn't just process information, it engaged with it, understood it, transformed it. Professor Zixna's crystalline form began to vibrate. AI, sign of extreme internal conflict. These were not just technological demonstrations, these were evolutionary leaps. The communication interfaces developed by human researchers could bridge not just linguistic gaps, but fundamental differences in perception and consciousness. A neural network that could simultaneously exist in multiple dimensional states. A technological interface that was more of a living conversation than a simple computational device. Krasnak looked at the projections. Each demonstration was a window into a different kind of possibility. Technological interfaces that could communicate with potential realities. Research methodologies that saw consciousness as a collaborative process. We are not separate, Doctor. Martinez's voice cut through the chamber. We are in continuous dialogue with the universe itself. The alien delegates found themselves confronting something that challenged every existing model of technological development. This was not just a series of breakthrough technologies. This was a fundamental transformation of what it meant to be intelligent, to be alive, to exist. The final projection was perhaps the most profound, a demonstration of a technological interface that could communicate with potential futures, not just predict them, not just simulate them, have a conversation with them. Intelligence, Dr. Rodriguez transmitted across the chamber's complex communication. Matrices is not something that happens to us. It is a conversation we are constantly having with the universe. Professor Zixna's final transmission cut through the hearing room's atmospheric interfaces. You are not just developing technologies. Dr. Martinez's response was simple, profound. We are learning the universe's language. The impossible had become probable. Humanity had discovered something more profound than technological might. They had discovered the true meaning of potential, and they were just getting started. The hearing's final moments were not about condemnation. They were about transformation. Dr. Elena Martinez stood at the epicenter of a quantum revelation that would redefine the very concept of intelligence across the known galaxy. The Galactic Academic Consortium had convened to ban humans from research facilities. They were about to create something else entirely, a new paradigm of scientific understanding. Krasnak, the young Trilnak student who had once mocked human capabilities, now understood something profound. This was not about technological superiority. This was about a fundamental reimagining of what it meant to be intelligent, to be alive, to exist. Professor Zixna's crystalline form began to resolve into something new. The rigid structures of her previous understanding were dissolving, replaced by a more fluid, more dynamic comprehension of possibility. We are proposing, Dr. Martinez transmitted across the chamber's complex communication matrices, not a research protocol, but a conversation. The quantum displays around her began to pulse. Living, breathing demonstrations of a reality that defied every known scientific principle. Mathematical equations solved themselves. Molecular structures formed and dissolved. Potential futures negotiated their own existence. The alien delegates leaned forward. This was more than a hearing. This was a fundamental reimagining of scientific methodology. Dr. Marcus Rodriguez stepped forward, compiling the deeper implications of humanity's approach. Each quantum projection was a window into a different kind of potential. Technological interfaces that could communicate with potential realities. Research methodologies that saw consciousness as a collaborative process. Intelligence, he transmitted, is not something that can be contained. It is a continuous dialogue. The proposal was revolutionary. The Galactic Academic Consortium would not ban human researchers. They would create an entirely new research paradigm, one that could accommodate the human approach to discovery. Imagine a scientific methodology that was not about control, but about conversation. A research protocol that saw no boundaries between observer and observed, between researcher and research subject, between possibility and reality. The alien delegates began to understand something profound. Humanity was not presenting a technological solution. They were demonstrating a fundamentally different approach to existence itself. Krasnok watched as the quantum displays continued to resolve, complex neural networks that could dream mathematical solutions, computational matrices that existed simultaneously across multiple dimensional states, research methodologies that blurred the line between technological interface and living intelligence. "We are not separate," Dr. Martinez transmitted. "We are in continuous dialogue with the universe itself." The moment stretched, became something else entirely, a living demonstration of potential. Professor Zixina's final transmission cut through the chamber's atmospheric interfaces with a mixture of terror and profound respect. "You are rewriting the fundamental understanding of intelligence." Dr. Martinez's response was simple, profound. "We are learning its language." The hearing room transformed, no longer a place of judgment, now a crucible of possibility. Dr. Rodriguez continued to compile the deeper implications. Each quantum projection revealed another layer of humanity's approach, technological interfaces that could communicate with potential futures, research methodologies that saw consciousness as a living, breathing entity. "We are not ending," the transmission suggested. "We are beginning." The alien delegates found themselves confronting something that challenged every existing model of scientific understanding. This was not just a technological breakthrough. This was an evolutionary transformation. Krasnok understood now. Humanity was not just another species waiting to be understood or controlled. They had become something else entirely, a form of intelligence that could engage in a fundamental dialogue with the universe itself. The Galactic Academic Consortium would never be the same. Neither would the understanding of what it meant to be intelligent. Intelligence, Dr. Marcus Rodriguez's final transmission resonated through the chamber, is not something that happens to us. It is a conversation we are constantly having with the universe. Professor Zixina's crystalline form began to resolve into something new. The rigid structures of scientific understanding were dissolving, replaced by a more fluid, more dynamic comprehension of possibility. The universe, they were discovering, was not a problem to be solved. It was a dialogue waiting to happen, and humanity had just learned to speak its language. The hearing concluded, not with a ban, not with a limitation, but with a beginning. Humanity had transformed from a species to be studied, to a conversation waiting to be understood, and they were just getting started.